Hi, I'm Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. Welcome to We Don't Have to Choose. Today we're going to do something different. We get a lot of questions about Operation Metro Surge, what happened here, what our office has been doing in many different cases, and so we're going to have our first guest host. That's going to be Jen White, who's the Director of Community Affairs, and she's going to be interviewing me about Operation Metro Surge. Stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome to We Don't Have to Choose. My name is Jen White, and I'm the Director of Community Affairs here in the County Attorney's Office, and I will be the special guest host for today's episode. I will be interviewing Mary and asking some questions about our office's response to Operation Metro Surge. How are you today, Mary?
I'm well, thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for allowing me to be a guest host today.
Of course.
So we'll just jump right in. The first question I have is, how did the initial deal to investigate jointly come about?
So on January 7th was when Renee Good was shot. And, you know, things started out the way they normally work here, which is I was on the phone with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI and the BCA, and we had all agreed it would be a joint investigation. And I think for comparison, if people remember to the political assassination, the FBI and the BCA did do a joint investigation there. They submitted their cases both to the U.S. Attorney and to us, and we both charged. And so, you know, the charging is up to the individual agency, but the joint investigation is something that's common practice when, you know, something occurs that both the federal government and the state government are interested in. So we became aware shortly after that agreement to do the joint investigation that the BCA had been told they could no longer be part of this. And so that was kind of a sign that things were going to be different. And it got progressively worse because on January 14th, Julio Sosa Solis was shot in the leg. The BCA showed up there, and that was a little different because there was a large crowd that was really upset with the FBI and kind of, I think the BCA managed to convince the FBI, the federal agents, to move out of there so that they could do some investigation. And then not too much longer after that, Alex Preddy was shot and killed. That was on a Saturday. And we really knew something had changed here because the BCA did show up to try to do their normal investigation as they would if Minnesota law enforcement shot and killed someone. And federal agents surrounded the scene and would not let them enter into the scene at all to collect any evidence. And so we knew that things were different. We were prepared at that point to get a search warrant from a judge that we were able to make available on a Saturday. And even with a judicially signed search warrant, the federal government would not let the BCA come into that scene. We then filed a lawsuit, and I could talk more about the various lawsuits we filed. But this has been very different, and I think it's important for people to understand that what happened in the month of January and since then until recently was a very different situation than the local law enforcement agencies had ever experienced before.
Yeah, so there was more of a history of all of our agencies working collaboratively and understanding then that there would be two charges, both at the federal level and then at the state level, and that was normal practice, is what you're saying.
And so the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or the BCA, and the FBI, they all have relationships. They work together. The U.S. Attorney's Office works with us. So this was all built on relationships. And so the expectation was, of course, we're going to work on this in some form together. And then the U.S. Attorney's Office, our office, can decide what they want to do in terms of prosecution.
Right, so it was really just very different, unprecedented. Mm-hmm. When did it become apparent that preservation of evidence was a concern, and what did the office do?
So it became a concern just because when the federal government came into the scene of Renee Good, they took her car and they took the shell casings, they took all of the physical evidence. And we were concerned about what they were going to do with it, since they were excluding us and the BCA from an investigation. And they were making these disturbing statements. At the time, if you'll recall, the administration was calling both Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists. And they certainly weren't indicating in any way, especially in the Good case, that they planned to investigate that case at all. In fact, I think they made it clear that they were thinking about investigating Renee Good's widow, which was horrific. And so we were concerned, okay, if you're not actually going to do an investigation or share this information, what are you going to do with it? And so we wanted to make sure that we could get that evidence preserved. So we filed a lawsuit that afternoon that Alex Preddy was shot in federal court here on a Saturday to ask the court to order the federal government to preserve the evidence and to make sure that it wasn't altered. The federal court did grant what's called a temporary restraining order, and that was an order to the federal government that they would indeed save that evidence and not alter it in any way. There was a hearing the following Monday, and the federal government promised to preserve evidence and follow their normal practices, and the judge relied on their representations under oath that they would do that.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about maintaining neutrality? I mean, I think the federal government coming out and making these accusations about two victims really was, I think, astounding to community and really harmful, I think, in a lot of ways of making those types of accusations without all the facts being out.
Yeah, I think it was unusual in many respects. I think if you are government, if somebody's life is taken in the community by the government, you have an absolute responsibility to be objective and to not make inflammatory statements or any statements that appear that you've already made a judgment without clearly having access to any of the evidence. It's extremely harmful to the perception that you are actually going to conduct a thorough and fair investigation and go where the evidence leads you. And so I think in many respects, community was thinking, well, you've already made up your mind. And you seem not to be doing an investigation, but even if you did, how can we trust that you are doing an impartial investigation? The other aspect of it that I think was particularly painful was I can't even imagine the families and loved ones of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. I can't imagine. I mean, they learned from the media, I believe, that their loved ones had been shot and killed. And to have the administration of this country saying the things that they said about both of them was just, I can't imagine how hurtful that was on top of the sudden realization that your loved one was gone. And so that was damaging for a number of reasons.
I also want to point out, I think that leads to greater mistrust on behalf of the community in our institutions, whether it be government, law, and we've experienced that before, especially here in Minneapolis. So how do you think that impacted community's perception and that trust that we've all who work on the inside have been working really hard to try to build, rebuild, establish, and maintain?
We were still in the process of trying to rebuild that, and I think what happened here was just devastating to that. And I don't know whether or when that trust will be regained. And at the same time, that made it even more important that our office try to lead the way in what does it look like when you are doing a thorough investigation, an impartial, fair investigation, and trying to collect all of the evidence and then being transparent about a decision. That's always been really important to me, and that's the only way that I can think of that government does gain trust. It is when things happen behind scenes and community doesn't know why you made a decision or what the evidence showed. There's no way to build trust there. And so we have worked very hard to be as neutral as we possibly can, and we've tried to be as transparent as we possibly can too, so that the public understands what we're doing. At the same time, I completely understand, because I get these questions all the time, you have all the video. Why haven't you charged? And from the outside, I completely understand that. From the inside, I just wish people could know how much time every day we spend on all of these cases, and it's very complicated for a number of reasons. But I understand why people who were asking at the time, hey, our government just did this, and they're calling these two people domestic terrorists. Is there ever going to be any accountability? And I know it's been 6 months, and people are still asking that question.
That leads me to my follow-up. It can be really hard to balance that. I know transparency has been a cornerstone of your administration. So how do you kind of navigate that need for the public wanting to know what's going on? You also mentioned a couple times, staff was working on Saturdays. I mean, really, I'm assuming work's happening around the clock. It's just not able to be as visible to the community. So how do you maintain that balance of wanting to have transparency, but also maintaining the integrity of the potential cases?
Yeah, it is a tough balance, and I can give as an example the fact that we had this press conference earlier this week to announce that we had been evidence sharing with the federal government. That had been going on, those conversations had been going on for several weeks, but we couldn't talk about that because throughout the whole last 6 months, we've had conversations. I would say the local law enforcement agencies never really gave up on the idea that there could be evidence sharing, but those conversations were stopped. And so as we were trying to work through the last couple of weeks, certainly it would have been nice for me to be able to tell the public, hey, we're finally sharing information. But it took a long time to get to that point where we were starting to get some of that evidence. And certainly we didn't want to do anything publicly that would harm our ability to get that evidence. So it really is focusing on what is in the best interest here of our investigation. How, if we talk about this publicly, is that going to have some impact? Is that going to harm our ability to do the thing that we're telling the public we're trying to do?
Yeah, it's really difficult. What do you think led to the breakthrough of the federal government deciding that they were going to finally share evidence with the office?
So I can't speak to that from the perspective of I wasn't part of any of the conversations within the U.S. Attorney's Office. I can only say the conversations that we have had with them, with the BCA, with the FBI, were really that we were all trying to get back to what was normal. And I realize for some people saying that, it's kind of like that ship sailed. But in terms of normal evidence sharing, so that we could continue our investigation with all of the evidence that they had as well, particularly since they took some of that physical evidence from the scene, and they certainly had access to agents and that kind of thing. And so we filed the separate lawsuit in DC asking the judge to order them to give us that, but we're very grateful for, whatever reason, that they did give us that information.
And is that lawsuit still standing now that they're sharing? What is the status, I guess, of that lawsuit asking for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we put that on hold. That's probably not the correct legal term, but we had filed a couple of times a request to delay responses in the lawsuit because we were engaged in ongoing discussions. And so that lawsuit still remains, and I think our goal here is to see how this continues to evolve with the hope that ultimately we can settle that lawsuit.
Great. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. So the office did end up charging one of the ICE officers in a road rage incident. How did our local law enforcement get access to the scenes and evidence in that case in order for the office to be able to charge?
So that case came to the attention of law enforcement because the two people in the car reported that. They called 911 and they said, hey, this person is pointing a gun at us. And so the State Patrol responded to them, and they actually had video of the car, license plate, that kind of thing. And so the State Patrol officer or State Patrol trooper could look at that video and get the license plate, and at some point did realize that that vehicle was at Whipple, which is where ICE is located here, and did go out there to interview the two agents who were in the car. And so it didn't, nobody knew ICE was involved. You know, our victims, I describe it sometimes as probably something every Minnesotan has thought about or experienced or something like that, that they're driving in a lane. You're supposed to go down to one lane and it slows down. And some people are very anxious to skip ahead and drive on the shoulder and try to cut ahead. That is, well, I can't speak to what the ICE agents thought they were doing, but the perception of the person in the car was here was this person in an unidentified black SUV. I mean, there was no way that he could tell that it was ICE because it didn't have any identifying markings. He just looked and saw somebody driving illegally on the shoulder and just kind of moved over into that lane to kind of say, hey, you know, you shouldn't be in that lane, stop trying to cut in front of us. And so the ICE agent drove up eventually next to them and pointed the gun at them. So that came to us in a different way. Mm-hmm. The state trooper at the time, the call came in, did not know it was ICE. Nobody knew it was ICE until a little later on. The state patrol submitted that case to our office, which also was different because I believe that's the only case that local law enforcement submitted to our office during Operation Metro Surge. So that came to us through the state patrol. We were able to look at the reports and make a charging decision.
Do you think that they submitted it because they weren't fully aware at the time that they were ICE agents?
They were aware at the time, and we actually had some discussions with them about it, and we had asked them to do, I think, some additional follow-up as well. But for whatever reason, they did submit it, which they should have, and we're grateful for that because any instance where a person is pointing a gun at other drivers is important for us to take a look at.
Absolutely. And that case is ongoing, is that right?
It is. So the status of that case is that the agent who is charged has made an expected motion, we knew that this would happen, to remove his case to federal court. And so we're preparing to litigate that. That might be this coming Monday. The defense has asked for a continuance, so we may be litigating that Monday. It may get continued down the road, but eventually we will be litigating in federal court whether the ICE agent can have his case removed to federal court. Now, even if it is removed to federal court, our office would still prosecute it. In other words, it's not the U.S. Attorney's Office. It's this very strange kind of unique situation where our office, local prosecutors, our team that's already prosecuting it, just simply prosecutes it in federal court in front of a federal judge. But state law applies, so should he or any other federal agent be convicted under state law, the president cannot pardon that person.
Oh, that makes sense then. And just one extra additional question around that. I know a lot of folks in community were wondering, or it had been said by others, so your attorneys, our attorneys, they've been sworn in, is that right, so that they are able to try a case in a federal court?
Yes, actually, it's a fairly easy process. You file paperwork. In fact, I am now, something I had no idea I would be doing 35 years into my career. But yes, I was sworn into federal court. We had some lawyers who actually were capable or able to practice because they were sworn in. And the ones that weren't yet sworn in have been sworn in. And as I said, all that requires is filling out some paperwork and having somebody sign that you are of good character, somebody who is already a member of the federal bar, and then you get sworn in, and that's it.
Oh, good to know, and clarify that for community as well. I want to talk a little bit about Julio Sosa Solis and that shooting. I know there was an arrest made of Christian Castro. What is the status of that? Is he still in Texas, or has he been extradited to Minnesota? Where are things at with that case?
So he was arrested in Texas. He's currently in a jail down there. And we are currently in what's called the extradition process. So anytime, and this is very frequent, so let me give you an example of Minnesota. Let's say somebody comes to Minnesota, they are arrested by law enforcement because law enforcement can see that another state wants them for some type of offense. They're brought into custody. What happens is law enforcement, or actually probably our office, reaches out to law enforcement in that other state saying, do you still want this person? Because ultimately, if they want the person, they have to come and pick them up. So that's why you want to make sure, hey, I know you had a warrant out for this person. And sometimes they don't want to pick them up. They just want the warrant out there. They don't want to take the expense or whatever to come and pick somebody up. So what happens then if the state that's looking for this person wants them, the state, like Minnesota, let's say, files what's called a fugitive warrant. It's just this person is wanted by, if it was the reverse, Texas. And so we are coming here to court on this fugitive warrant. Happens frequently. It's common. And so that's what happened down in Texas. Bail was set by a judge. And the other thing that has to happen, or frequently happens, is a person can do what's called waive extradition. So they can say, yes, I'm the person you're looking for. That doesn't mean I did the thing you're telling me I did, but I am the person you're looking for. Because a person does have a right to contest identity. They cannot have a mini trial. So for instance, Mr. Castro cannot have a mini trial in Texas to contest whether he is guilty of the charges that we brought. He can have like an evidentiary hearing to say, yes, my name is Christian Castro, but I'm not the Christian Castro you're looking for in this case. And so most people don't do that. They will waive extradition and come back. But if they don't waive extradition, then the step that happens is Minnesota sends a warrant, the governor's warrant, to Texas, and then the governor there has to sign their warrant authorizing us to go pick him up and bring him back here. Sometimes that can be a long process. I mean, not forever, but it can go on, for several weeks. And so we're currently engaged in that process right now.
Okay.
Of trying to get him back here to Minnesota
back.
So we can start our prosecution.
Okay. And so while he's waiting, he's still in custody in Texas, is that right?
He is.
Okay.
Yeah,
and
he's been in custody since he was arrested.
Okay. And then, so our law enforcement would need to go to Texas to get him, right? And bring him back.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good to know.
And that's only right, it's Minnesota that wants him.
Right.
And so Minnesota law enforcement would have to take the trip down there to Texas to bring him back.
Okay. Got it. I want to shift a little bit as well. The process is so slow, I think, within, the criminal legal system, courts, all of that. I know there's been a lot of anticipation and anxiety on behalf of community, and you mentioned it a little bit before, but your office also opened up some public portals and asked people to send their video evidence in incidents, multiple incidents. And I think the sentiment has been, well, you've got all these videos. Why is it taking so long? Why haven't you charged yet? Can you talk a little bit about that? Why is it taking so long to make a decision in the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy specifically?
We actually opened a public portal on both of those cases, asking the public to submit any video, or maybe they were a witness to something, maybe they heard of somebody who is. We got over 1,000 submissions. And so that's 1,000 submissions that our team, our staff has to go through. And we did that, and that was very unusual. We've never done that before, but we did that because we kept seeing video. People in the community have seen various videos, and then videos would come out in media. For instance, Jonathan Ross's video. And that was never released to us. That somehow got released to the media. So we thought, there are probably people out there who had video of some kind, and we want to make sure we capture all of that because it's not clear to us at all that the federal government is doing an investigation. We want to make sure that that doesn't get taped over or disappear or something like that. And we're grateful to have received over 1,000 submissions. So that probably lends to more, well, you even have more video than we've probably seen, so what's taking you so long? So normally, when we look at a case, we get a packet, essentially, a bunch of police reports, videos, that kind of thing from law enforcement. And often we have most of what we're going to get, not all of it. But we certainly have the identity of the people that are being investigated. For instance, in Minnesota, if a licensed Minnesota peace officer shoots and kills someone, the BCA will always do an investigation by law. And so they will do their investigation, and when they're done with that, they will submit it to our office or whatever county it happens in. We take a look at that investigation. We may ask them to do more, but ultimately we decide whether charges are appropriate or not. So let me just walk through some differences. So when we go through the BCA process, we absolutely know who the police officers are or officer is. And in fact, the BCA releases that publicly fairly shortly after that. And typically that person or people are put on administrative leave while the investigation is going on. We had no idea who the people were who shot Alex Preddy. And we know publicly that Jonathan Ross was identified as the person who shot Renee Good, but we don't have that confirmed. And in the Preddy case, ProPublica, a media source, did identify those two agents, but we had no way of knowing whether that was accurate. So you think about, okay, even if we were to charge, where are these people? How do we prove it is the person? Because I just talked about extradition.
Right.
You have to be able to prove the identity of the people. And so that was an issue. We also had no idea whether any of the agents, including the people who shot, gave statements. We had no idea if they did or what they said. We also heard through the media that the agents that interacted with Alex Preddy were wearing body camera. But we just heard that through the media, but we certainly didn't have access to any of that body camera. And so we were in a situation where we were waiting for the BCA to complete its investigation, and that was pretty complex because it had a lot of video, to get that to us, to be able then to look at, okay, what do we actually have? And what's missing that we would normally either have or know didn't exist? And so that was part of the issue too, because you don't know what you don't know, and you have to try to brainstorm, well, what would the officers say? Instead of what did they say, or they didn't make statements, or okay, apparently there's all this body cam, what does it show? And you get into the situation, and we, in Julio Sosa Solis, in that Castro case, we had enough of the evidence to believe that we had a good case, that we could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Christian Castro was the person and did shoot Julio Sosa Solis in the leg. And we believed that that was unlawful use of force. So we ended up charging it. But we weren't at that point with Renee Good and Alex Preddy because we simply didn't have all of the evidence from the BCA, nor did we have anything from the federal government. And so the extra layer here about this taking time, and the extra layer that we have to prepare for that we don't if it's simply like a Minnesota law enforcement agent, is that anytime a federal agent is charged by local state prosecutors, they have a right to ask that their case be removed to federal court. And we talked about that a little before. But that's a process too. And then they have a right to ask the judge to give them or find that they have what's called supremacy clause immunity. They do not have absolute immunity, which the administration kept saying, but they can have some immunity if certain circumstances are met. And so if we're going to charge, we have to be prepared for that litigation in federal court. And we certainly wouldn't want to go ahead and get dismissed out of court if we thought, well, there's evidence out there that really would help on these issues. So we have been very thoughtful and intentional about the process here. We also, as I mentioned earlier, had filed a lawsuit in federal court asking the court to order the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to give us the evidence that we had already asked for. That's civil litigation. That can take many, many months. And we filed that a while ago, and we were still in the process of briefing that, writing memos about it. And so we're also in this position where before the last couple of weeks, okay, do we need to wait until that litigation is done to get all of that evidence, or is what we have enough to make a decision? And we weren't quite there yet, but that's another reason why you want to be cautious, because there may be a world where a judge orders them to hand all that over. And do we want to make a decision before that happens? So there are many different reasons why it's taking so long, but what I would say to people is I assure them I am very proud of the many people we have working on this, and I am very confident in this team that it's the best team in the country to be making these decisions. We are also working with 2 law firms in Washington, D.C. They are volunteering their time. They are experts who used to be with the DOJ, that kind of thing, and they're experts on federal law, and so they have been helping. They've been indispensable in helping us figure out how to navigate all of these federal issues, these legal issues.
Sounds very complicated. And
it is much more complicated than I ever would have thought. And because we, as local prosecutors, we just don't ever really need to think about federal court or practicing there, or removal or supremacy clause immunity. I mean, this is pretty unprecedented. And so it is complicated, and we want to get it right.
Yeah, and that's also what I'm hearing. We want to make sure that we've got all our ducks in a row, because it really could jeopardize things if we weren't fully ready.
Yes.
Got it. The federal government is sharing evidence with us now. Could they, at any given moment, decide that they want to stop doing that and take the evidence back?
Well, they could decide that they're not going to do that anymore and not give us any additional evidence, but I don't see how they could take what we already have back. So we already have that. We're looking at it right now. Hopeful, and the expectation is that they will continue to share evidence as it comes in. That's certainly our hope and expectation here.
Okay. So given how slowly things move through the courts and all of that, what happens to the charges if these cases don't resolve before the end of your term? It's July.
Yes.
Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Well, there is no statute of limitations on murder, homicide, that kind of thing, whatever these charges would be, a death case. And so we don't have to worry about that timeline. It is, and it should be, a concern to voters here. If they want to see this through, including the prosecutions we already have in motion, and continuing to look at these cases and other cases that we're reviewing in our Transparency and Accountability Project, that they elect a county attorney that is committed to doing that. And so that's one of those things I think voters need to be aware of. If this is something that they want to continue to see through, they need to elect somebody who is committed to doing that.
I think that's really important. So the community needs to know they need to do their homework and their research, and then for sure get out and vote in the election this November. Great. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me and answering a lot of questions I think that both myself and community have had around kind of the ins and outs of these really important cases, and really pursuing accountability for Minnesotans.
Thank you for being such a great guest host.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for tuning in to We Don't Have to Choose. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe for further episodes and updates.